Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast, brought to you by Pick Six, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPicks for $50 in Pick Six credits with a $5 deposit. First, I just want to say thanks to everyone who asked a question. I had a big plan to talk about my favorite prospect sleepers for 2025 value, figuring there might not be enough questions coming up the holiday weekend and with the season winding down, but you guys delivered, and I just wanted to say thank you. I could not do this without your support, and I don't take that for granted. So thank you for everyone who asked a question or subscribed for the prospect rankings, which were fully updated Tuesday afternoon, early evening. Was rushing to get those done. So first question here from Chief F says, after rough starts to their professional careers, Kumar Rocker at 25th overall and Jack Leiter at 116 overall are both now ranked in the top 125. Is this a lesson in patience when dealing with pitchers with prospect pedigree, or are they outliers in overcoming early professional struggles to right the prospect ship? He says, I understand they've had different issues, but grouping them together because of the Vanderbilt connection. We'll start with Kumar Rocker here. There's no way to sort of scientifically prove this or even anecdotally prove this, but I think Rocker's Tommy John surgery could go down as the best Tommy John surgery to date. I think that was Dr. Keith Meister that performed that surgery on Rocker. Just in terms of the pitcher and prospect he was before the surgery and the pitcher he was after returning. I went back and looked on Baseball Reference just to see if like any of the sort of big real life rankings outlets had Rocker as a top 100 guy coming into the year, and none of them did, which I actually was sort of surprised by, just because he does have a ton of pedigree, like you mentioned. But he was on no top 100 rankings, or at least none that I can quickly look up before the season. And now I've got him as a 25th overall prospect, and he just came back from Tommy John surgery. So it's a testament to just how dominant he was, especially in that AAA start the other day. His stuff in that start at AAA was probably as good as it's ever been. Maybe you could go back to just his absolute peak at Vanderbilt, where he was K'ing, 18 guys in starts and stuff like that. But I would argue that Kumar Rocker's stuff is better than it's ever been. I think he was averaging 98 with the fastball, just ridiculously unhittable slider, which has always been, he's always been kind of fastball slider, but they were both just dominant pitches. So there's still some risk here with Rocker, but I think for the moment, it looks like he's just at the peak of his powers. There was so much negative reporting regarding the health of his arm from 2021 through 2022, beyond just the idea of him potentially needing Tommy John surgery. And so I was kind of fully prepared for him to come back and, eventually be moved to the bullpen, since he is kind of a two-pitch guy. But I mean, he's just looked better than ever as a starter since coming back. So I don't know if there's really a parallel to draw here from a guy that, peak Kumar Rocker at Vanderbilt, before any of the arm stuff popped up, to now. Like, I just can't think of another pitcher who's had a similar trajectory over a few years, with just injuries and performance being up and down and getting drafted a couple times. And it's been a whirlwind few years for Rocker, but I mean, he looks absolutely dominant right now. I don't view ranking Jack Leiter at 116 as a vote of confidence, or that he's like an example of the virtue of patience. I think trading Leiter at the peak of his prospect value, or the first year player draft pick that became Leiter, I think still would be by far the best course of action, just with the benefit of hindsight. So, I think Leiter being at 116 and Rocker being at 25 are kind of two different things. Jeff McDowell says, I see you have moved Kumar Rocker way up and you moved Arjun Nimmala way up. Your thoughts? So yeah, I guess the only negatives with Rocker that I can see are just the fact that he's still mostly fastball slider, and he's got a very lengthy injury history, and he will enter 2025 having thrown around 40 innings this year, I would guess. if you told me like I was getting 100 innings in the majors from Rocker, Jackson Jobe, Bubba Chandler, Andrew Painter, and Noel Schultz next season, I think I'd take Rocker's 100 innings over the other 4 pitching prospects in my top 25, just because I think he's kind of entering his prime right now. And the others were all prep arms who are just sort of ascending, or in Jobe's case, kind of stalling a little bit. I think Jobe's kind of treading water right now in terms of his value at AA. Schultz kind of treading water too, and then Painter, obviously, we just don't know what he's going to look like. But yeah, I think Rocker is certainly a 2025 fantasy baseball target, really in any format. I think he's going to spend most of next year in the majors. It's just a question of how they choose to manage his innings. As for Nimmala, I think he's got just insane bat speed, very questionable hit tool, but he's so young and has improved so much just from the beginning of the season when he was overmatched at single A to now. There's definitely some boomer bust feel with Nimmala. I could see the strikeouts just steadily ticking down as he gets more comfortable against pro pitching, but I could also see the strikeouts spiking to a dangerous place after his promotion to higher AA. So we'll see with Nimmala, but pretty special power upside at shortstop with him, and he'll steal some bases too. Paul Max says some real life lists have Starlyn Caba of the Phillies pushing top 50 on the basis of the playing time floor that his glove offers. What does he have to show to move up to the top 50 for fantasy? So yeah, Starlyn Caba, potentially elite defensive shortstop in the Phillies system, opened the year in rookie ball, and now he's up to single A. So potentially elite defensive shortstops or center fielders are right up there with catchers in terms of prospects who can often be much more valuable in real life than fantasy. So I buy the notion that Caba is a borderline top 50 real life prospect. If I was confident in him being a 20 homer threat in his mid 20s, I'd have him well inside the top 100. But he hasn't really shown any signs of that type of power yet. There's definitely a case for just betting on the playing time. Like you're right, like the glove will get him playing time, just betting on that and the hit tool and the speed. And I would probably go that route if he just teased a little pop at single A, but he's got 0 extra base hits and a 58% ground ball rate in 23 games. Franklin Arias of the Red Sox, I think, is a worthwhile comparison here with Caba, as they came into the year with fairly similar scouting reports. I don't think Arias was quite as glowing as Caba's from just a defense standpoint, but Arias was, I think, at least lightly considered sort of the glove first shortstop prospect coming into the year. And he showed notable power in the Florida Complex League, and then did some damage at single A. So if Caba had kind of done that, he'd be probably ranked in the sort of 70 to 80 range, but just still all projection in terms of power for him. I mean, he might end up being one of these guys who's just more of like a 5 to 10 homer guy. So still kind of waiting to see how that develops. Camposit says Charlie Condon of the Rockies seems to have taken quite the tumble. What are the concerns there? Well, Condon has 2 walks and 29 strikeouts in his first 21 games. It's a pretty big red flag. I was pretty open before the draft about this being a year to just be very cautious about buying into what the college hitters did in the spring. We've talked about this before, but the guys are able to use illegal bats in games. There's not really, the NCAA doesn't really crack down on that. The balls are often juiced. We don't really know when and where, but there's even been whispers of certain SEC home parks, there being kind of video related cheating going on. So it's just, there was going to be some college hitters who came into pro ball, and then it kind of became clear that the numbers they were putting up in college were sort of bogus numbers that were just inflated by a bunch of different factors that we can't really take into account. But it's too early to say Condon is going to be a bust, but there's really just nothing positive to point to with Condon's pro debut. So you're really leaning a lot on that career at Georgia, and specifically his 2024 season. So I tend to just value what he's doing in pro ball over everything he did in college, just because I don't know everything that went into what he was doing in college, and I know that it isn't even playing field in pro ball here. So lot to be concerned about with Condon. If you like videos like this one, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you're on the fence at all about going to First Pitch Arizona this year, I'll be there, and there's a special running through Friday, so now's a great time to sign up for First Pitch Arizona. And if you see me there, please don't hesitate to come up and say hey. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds, or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter? If you have, then you're going to love Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. All right, back here with the prospect mailbag. Chaz Beef says, you seem to be the biggest holdout on Chase Dollander of the Rockies, and seeing him at 150 when Baseball America has him 5th is significant. He's a clear-cut starting pitcher. Do you think there's any chance he can be successful at Coors, or at least manage the home starts? And do you really believe in the 40 pitchers ahead of him more? So Dollander, I really think he might be the most interesting and sort of challenging player that I've ever ranked for fantasy. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I can't recall a situation quite like this. It's been easy to just sort of always downgrade or ignore Rockies pitchers since they haven't had any nearly as good as Dollander come through the system. I was trying to think, like, have I ranked any Rockies pitching prospects before on the top 400? I think John Gray might have been ranked. That was sort of right at the beginning when I was sort of taking over the prospect content. John Gray was still a prospect, and I think I probably ranked him in the top 100 or so when I was first getting started. But I don't think I've ranked a single other Rockies pitching prospect other than Dollander since John Gray. Ubaldo Jimenez in 2010 and German Marquez in 2018 are the only times a Rocky starter has put up an SP1 caliber season since I've been playing fantasy. And there are a lot of other just stats you could dig up about just sort of how much worse Rockies pitchers are for generating fantasy stats than those other 29 teams. Of course, there's a lot of noise in those stats in that research because of just the fact that Dollander is easily the best pitching prospect they've had in a decade. So it's not like they've just had a bunch of good pitching prospects and none of them had success. So there's a lot of factors here. And I don't disagree with, like the part about, do you really believe in the 40 pitchers ahead of him more? I mean, he's not worse as a pitcher than the vast majority of those guys, right? It's just sort of, do I want to roster him more than I want to roster the other guys on these other teams? And that's sort of the question. I wouldn't, if I was doing this for real life, I don't think I'd have him as high as Baseball America, but I would have him in my top 25. It's just tough for me to recommend highly valuing a Rockies pitching prospect. Pitching prospects are extremely risky as is without the Coors Field factor. So I think it's just really tough. And it might be part of, like we all have biases. Like I probably have a bit of a bias against Rocky, a bit more of a bias maybe against Rockies pitchers than some who rank prospects, just because of how much fantasy baseball I play. Like I just, the weekly kind of grind of playing high stakes fantasy baseball, I'm always concerned about like Coors Field and stuff like that. So and I'm never rostering Rockies pitchers, even for road starts. So it's just hard for me to kind of come to the conclusion that I should be ranking a Rockies pitching prospect sort of in that elevated range. That said, I don't have a problem with anyone else viewing him as a top 50 or top 75 prospect for fantasy. I just don't think anyone really knows how this is going to play out. I think anyone who is telling you Dollander's definitely going to make it work in Coors, or anyone who's telling you he definitely won't make it work in Coors, is kind of full of crap. But I don't think anyone really knows how it's going to play out. Like Dollander could just be so good that it doesn't really matter. And he's, regularly getting drafted as a top 30 starting pitcher in fantasy. Like I'm not saying that can't happen. But I also just think it's also possible that he's a guy that you don't really value that much because he's going to hurt your ratios, even though he's going to give you those strikeouts. And inevitably you'll bench him for some of his good starts, and you'll start him for some of his bad starts, just with the Coors factor in there. So it's a really complicated issue. I was thinking about, actually, I usually have Phil Dussault, the robot, on each off season, just to kind of talk strategy and stuff like that. I might ask someone like him just what they would do with a top 5 pitching prospect who happens to be a Rockies pitching prospect, because it's a tricky one. So I'm not disagreeing with people that really like Dollander in terms of how good of a pitcher he is. I just struggle with what to do with the Rockies factor there. Ross Redk says, I'm a little surprised to see Drew Gilbert of the Mets fall so far. Seems like this year can be mostly explained by injury and small sample noise. Are you seeing something else that gives you pause, or are you maybe more concerned about the pattern of injuries now? Yeah, I mean, Gilbert, usually when I'm getting questions about, like, you surprised you lowered this guy so much, that's usually just confirmation that I probably did lower him too much. But in terms of what sort of soured me on Gilbert, I only recently learned that he was likely using an illegal bat while he was at Tennessee. And I loved Gilbert, the prep or the amateur prospect, a lot in that draft. And so that's sort of anchored how high he's been ranked. But now it's kind of like, well, how much of that was real, what he was doing at Tennessee? I think we can pretty much throw out what he did as a 22-year-old at Asheville in 2023, just given how old he was and how hitter-friendly that park is. So we're really kind of looking at that 35-game run with Binghamton as the one thing to point to that suggests there's notable pop with Drew Gilbert. He's got a 21.6% hard hit rate this year, 26.5% soft hit rate this year. That's just terrible, obviously. But, yeah, you can maybe explain that by the injury. I don't really think you could explain it by the small sample. And he only had a 23.6% hard hit rate in 2023. So it's really that 35-game run at Binghamton that you could point to as like, yeah, there's power in there. Plus, he's going to probably play, if he comes up as a Met, he'll be playing in a very pitcher-friendly park. He turns 24 this month, and he'll be heading back to AAA next season. So, if we get to like May, June of next season and he's not really producing at AAA, I mean, his stock is just going to really, really tank. So, tough guy to rank because of you could call it a lost season, but yeah, I'm definitely growing skeptical of how much power he's going to bring to the table in games. And he's not like a crazy burner either. Like he's probably a plus runner, but he's not like a 70 grade runner. Okay. Chief F says, what are your instant impressions from the first month of action for players from the 2024 draft and how you'd approach it from a first year player draft perspective? It's very, very fluid. I think unless Roki Sasaki gets posted this winter from Japan, I would not love the idea of picking in the top 3. I think Jack Caglione and Cam Smith are maybe the guys that I could see myself targeting with like a top 5 pick. I'll be very interested to sort of see where guys like Caglione go, where Charlie Condon goes, Nick Kurtz, Christian Moore, like just a lot of variables. But I love what I've seen from Jack Caglione. I love what I've seen from Cam Smith with the Cubs. I'd love to roster Roki Sasaki. But for the most part, it's just very fluid. And like I said, with the Condon thing, what we're seeing from these college hitters in a small sample against pro pitching, to me, is more important than everything they did in college, which I know is going to run counter to what, a lot of people may believe, but I know what I can judge what they're doing against pro pitching up against, whereas I just don't know all the factors that went into what these guys did in college. So it's a great example of why I hate the idea of doing first-year player drafts in dynasty leagues until the winter. I really think it's just a massive mistake to do your dynasty first-year player drafts right after the draft or during the season somehow. So, all right, I got a name here that I really am struggling to pronounce. It's not a real name; it's a username, but Diatomaceous Chris or something like that. I don't know. But he says, I'm curious about Colt Emerson's drop. Colt Emerson of the Mariners just seemed to have a bad 7 games there. Wondering also how he compares to someone like Kevin McGonigle of the Tigers. Do they both have limited upsides? I'll answer that second part first. So Emerson and McGonigle, I think, are quite different. With Emerson, the realistic ceiling is high average, high OBP, third baseman, 25 to 30 homer pop. Limited speed as he fills out. I think that's Emerson's realistic ceiling. And then with McGonigle, I think the ceiling is kind of a high average, high OBP second baseman with 15 homer pop, 30 plus steals. So you're getting about, in theory, if they both were to hit their ceilings or what I think are their ceilings, Emerson would hit twice as many homers as McGonigle, and McGonigle would steal twice as many bases as Emerson. And they'd have similar average and OBP. But as for Emerson's drop, I didn't want anyone in the 30s or 40s to have down arrows on this update. Those are automated. I don't pick who gets an arrow next to their name, but if I could, I would have not had a single guy in the 30s or 40s with a down arrow, because I think it's a gigantic tier basically after Max Clark at 11. Emerson should grow into significant power. He's hit the ball pretty hard this year, but it hasn't translated into over the fence power yet, or notable over the fence power yet. So we're still just projecting, what the power is going to be. And he does project to play in a park that really suppresses power. So, it's a really good prospect where we're projecting on the power. I'm expecting the speed to not really be a thing. So, probably should have slotted him a bit higher. In hindsight, I kind of wish I hadn't bumped Eduardo Quintero of the Dodgers. A bunch of these pitchers, Jacob Mizorowski, Zebby Matthews, Yilber Diaz, Quinn Matthews. I think in hindsight, I probably would have kept, the Emerson, Lazaro, Montes types ahead of those guys. So just, I kind of also wish I'd lower Condon and JJ Weatherholt even more, but I didn't want to overreact to their bad starts since I did like them a lot coming out. But yeah, I guess moral of the story is just don't look at the guys in the 30s or 40s that have down arrows and be like, well, why does he have a down arrow? I don't think any of those guys should have down arrows. I just think it's really a gigantic tier from Jackson Jobe at 12 all the way down to Lazaro Montes at 45. To me, that's just a massive tier. I could give you a long list of guys in there that I wish I I wish I could have found room for higher. I wish Carson Williams was higher. I wish Aiden Miller was higher. I wish Emerson was higher. I wish Montes was higher. I wish Keishel was higher. I love all these guys. There's only room for so many, and you got to rank them. But definitely don't be concerned about Emerson. But we are still kind of projecting that over the fence power to come. I think it will. CPAR08 says, how can the Marco Luciano development story be such a disaster from anointed starting shortstop coming into the season to DH at best? Well, I hope you didn't take that quote from the team about him being the shortstop at face value. That seemed like a comical propaganda type of quote at the time, just given how bad he was in 2023. I still think there's some appeal to buying low on Luciano in deep dynasty leagues, but he's just a total flyer at this point. Mike Greer says, what did Sebastian Walcott of the Rangers show you in the last month to finally make it into the elite tier? Also, it feels like you've been on the fence with Max Clark of the Tigers all year. What made you suddenly decide to make a big upward move after staying steady for so long? For the record, I wasn't looking at Walcott's last month when determining his ranking. It's just more about the totality of his season. In Walcott's last 100 games, he's slashing 283, 360, 475 with 11 homers and 25 steals and a 10% walk rate and a 24% strikeout rate. And he's been at high A all season, doesn't turn 19 until the middle of spring training. So, this is really remarkable stuff. Like, this is kind of Ronald Acuna, Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis. Like, you got to go back to those guys to find an international prospect who was doing the amount of damage that Walcott's doing at his age at such an advanced level for his age. Walcott's the same age as the high schoolers that just got drafted, and he's running those stats at high A. If he was doing this at single A, he'd still be a top 10 prospect, but he's doing it high A. He's been there all season. And he's got the same kind of physical tools to an Acuna or a Tatis or Ellie De La Cruz. And so this is a challenging one because there's a big group of subscribers who are only chasing upside, who are going to love the ranking of Walcott at 2. There's upside fiends. And then there's another big group of subscribers who are sort of hit tool hawks, and they're going to think it's too risky for him to be up there. I understand both sides of that, but I think when you factor in the age to level with Walcott, I'm just not that worried. It's just, you never see guys this age have as much success as he's having at such an advanced level for their age with his kind of physical tools. And then it just kind of doesn't work out at some point. Like it seems like it's going to work out with Walcott, and we'll see what happens next year with him. But a lot of the times in Dynasty, you want to chase a superstar that you can have on your team for 15 years or at least 10 years. That's kind of what it's all about. And I think Walcott gives you that potential. There's like a tier here. I think I view Walcott, Jason Dominguez, the Yankees, Roman Anthony of the Red Sox, Walker Jenkins of the Twins, and Leodalis DeVries of the Padres. I view those 5 guys all in the same tier, from 2 to 6. So if you prefer Dominguez or Anthony or Jenkins or DeVries over Walcott, that's totally fine. Now Clark, it's kind of simple. He slugged 525 from July on, including a promotion to high A mixed in there, and he slugged 365 for the first 3 months. So, I knew he could start getting to more power, which is why he was in the range he was, because it's like there's a possibility he starts getting to power. But I wasn't sure if or when he would, and now it's happening. So he got moved up. Luke Anderson says, can you touch on some of the young arms in the Rays pitching factory, specifically Yoniel Curet, Jackson Baumeister, and Ty Johnson? And then he says, will they be able to help Dylan Lesko turn things around? Got a few questions on Curet of the Rays. He's similar to guys like Yilber Diaz, the D-backs, or Ben Brown of the Cubs, just guys with monster stuff that came into the year with massive bullpen risk. And they ended up kind of throwing enough strikes to start. And I think it was more of the same with Curet early in the season. But he's got a 1.17 ERA, a 107 WHIP, and 89 strikeouts in his last 61 and 2/3 innings over 13 starts. So, I don't think control is all of a sudden a strength for Curet, but I think he is going to throw enough strikes to start, and he's already on the 40-man roster. And I think he's going to have some value in 2025. I think he'll be in that rotation at some point next summer if he stays healthy. Just massive strikeout upside. Those types of guys where, like part of the reason I moved Jacob Mizorowski up is it's so hard to find guys that are going to give you 200 plus Ks in a season. And that's such a game changer. I'm not saying that any of these prospects are going to do that, but I do think it's in the range of outcomes for a guy like Curet, just because of how good his stuff is. Baumeister has just been absolutely ridiculous since getting traded from Baltimore in the Zach Eflin deal. He just K'd a career high 11 batters in his most recent start at high A, and he has a 1.13 ERA, 0.63 WHIP, 35-4 K to walk in 24 innings since joining the Rays. Baumeister, the dip in walks is kind of the big story. He had a 14% walk rate with Baltimore, walk rate under 5% with Tampa Bay. So I don't know how real that is, but it's a drastic enough improvement that I'm kind of buying into it a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of strikeout upside with him as well. Really good frame, 6'4", really good fastball, just a lot of strikeout upside with him as well. And then, like with Baumeister, I think the Rays knew what they were doing when they targeted Ty Johnson in the package they got from Chicago for Isaac Paredes. Johnson, big time fastball, and he's 6'6", so it plays up even more. And he's got an ERA under 1, a WHIP way under 1, 39 Ks in 23 innings since the trade. So the Rays strike again, I think, in terms of targeting the right prospects in trade that they can buy semi-low on. And then, you mentioned Lesko at the end, like, can the Rays help Dylan Lesko turn things around? I was just blown away by just how bad his control has been just all season. Because I bumped Lesko off the top 400 on this update. I mean, it's just been terrible. The fewest walks he's had in a start this season is 2, and he's walked 3 or more batters in 16 of his 20 starts, which is really bad when you consider that he's logging fewer than 5 innings most outings. So, I was hoping Lesko would show some signs after the trade from San Diego, but it's been really bad. He's got 16 walks in 12 1/3 innings since the trade. I still generally like that he got a change of scenery, but it's going to be a major challenge for Lesko and the Rays to develop him into a starting pitcher, I think, at this point. Schmitty says, can you discuss the differences you see between Santiago Suarez and Gary Gil-Hill, 2 young Rays pitching prospects? Well, I preferred Gil-Hill, as Schmitty knows, from the rankings update. Projection, upside, I think that Gil-Hill gets the nod there. Suarez is probably a slightly better command at this stage, but I don't think command and control are weaknesses for Gil-Hill, and he's got better present stuff. I think he's got more long-term upside. I like his body way more. Gil-Hill is lean. He's athletic. Like, it's just exactly what you would want a single A starting pitcher's frame to look like. Suarez is I think he's going to steadily lose athleticism and eventually kind of develop into a husky innings eater type of frame. And so I think, Suarez to me has sort of number 3 starter upside. I think Gil Hill could end up being like a top 5 pitching prospect in a couple years. So just more upside, I think, with Gil Hill, even though Suarez does have really good command for a pitcher his age. Patrick Gilbert says, how does the Pirates rotation look in 2025, 2026? Pittsburgh's rotation could be one of the best in the game, I think, by 2026, health permitting. That's kind of the big wild card here. Paul Skeens, Mitch Keller, Jared Jones, obviously those 3 guys are good. They'll be there in 2026. I expect Bubba Chandler to compete for a rotation spot this upcoming spring. And then Thomas Harrington, I think, should join the rotation by the middle of the summer. So those are kind of like the big 5 to me, like Skeens, Keller, Jones, Chandler, Harrington. Like that's what the rotation will be if they're all healthy in a year, I think. Now, Mike Burrows, Hunter Barco, Braxton Ashcraft, Carlson Reed, who I think is a nice little sleeper, who I just added to the rankings on this update. They all bring interesting stuff to the table. They could be options if one of those other 5 go down or don't meet expectations. And it's just, I think you got to assume one of those guys ends up getting Tommy John surgery at some point before 2026. None of Skeens, Keller, Jones, or Chandler or Harrington. I don't think any of those 5 have had Tommy John surgery yet. So, and like to me, Jones, Chandler, Skeens, those guys are kind of fairly high risk for that type of thing, just given how hard they throw. So, that might happen to one of those guys, and maybe it's not quite that dream rotation, but man, the Pirates have done a really good job of stockpiling young arms, and very excited to see how that plays out. Hines had a question about Braxton Ashcraft of the Pirates. He said, is his drop due to a potential Tommy John surgery? So Ashcraft had Tommy John surgery in 2021, so it'd be pretty disastrous for him to need his second one already. The drop for Ashcraft was more about his inability to build up his innings than, like, I'm not going to go ahead and assume he's going to have his second Tommy John surgery just because of this forearm injury, but he might need a second one. And even if he's not, like, he's turning 25 this offseason, and his 73 innings this year were a career high. So that's sort of a thing you can kind of like look for when a guy kind of gets into his mid-20s and they still haven't been able to build up starters workload, or even really kind of come close to a starter's workload. That's generally not a great sign. Ross Redk says, curious why the drop for J.R. Ritchie of Atlanta. He's been quite good since coming back and seemed on the verge of a major breakout before Tommy John surgery. Just got the bump to high A. And of course, we know Atlanta will move their arms aggressively. Ritchie is he's a prospect where I didn't mean to lower him, but it just happened with other guys moving up and getting added in front of him. I agree with everything Ross said about Ritchie, but I do actually think it's telling that Atlanta hasn't moved Ritchie, in my mind, very aggressively. I sort of expected him to have been at high A for about a month by now. He experienced at single A before the Tommy John surgery and success. And so, it was a little surprising that they kept him at single A as long as they did. And I also thought we might see a velocity bump for Ritchie post Tommy John surgery. That can often happen, like Kumar Rocker. But Ritchie's been sitting 92 to 93 miles an hour with the fastball this year. I still like his command. I like his off-speed stuff. So just don't panic about where Ritchie's ranked. But I did expect him to have been at high A sooner than this. And just another worthwhile kind of like PSA, like the rankings, the top 400, I think it's a very valuable tool. And I don't even use it rigidly when I'm trying to figure out which guys to drop or which guys to add. Inevitably, you're going to be in leagues where you maybe want a different type of prospect in a different spot and that type of thing. It's more of like a tool where you can obviously see sort of how I feel about these guys, but you can sort, you can use the filters to sort and use some stats and that type of thing to narrow stuff down. So I definitely wouldn't recommend, I know Ross knows this, but I wouldn't recommend just rigidly saying, oh, like this guy's ahead of this guy, I need to drop this guy for this guy. Like Ritchie's the type of guy where if you're happy with him and you like where this is headed, by all means, just hang on to him. Just a lot was happening on this update. Lots of pop-up guys that I had more confidence in, and added even more guys from the draft and that type of thing. Charlie's says, any concern with Jordan Lawlar's long-term durability, given that he barely played this season? I think I got like this exact question on last month's mailbag, but absolutely, absolute concern about it. He's just a very tough guy to rank right now. He might be injury prone. I just think it's a little too early to say he definitely is, and it's something guys can put behind them. I'll have his whole injury history in the article version of the mailbag, but I definitely wouldn't fault anyone for just seeing that injury history and how much time he's missed, and just being like, yeah, I'm not into it. I'm going to cash him out this off season, or maybe even wait till spring training. Like maybe his value is higher in the spring if he gets off to a good start in the spring and it looks like he might win a job or something like that. But you could definitely cash Lawlar out if you're uncomfortable with the injury history. But he just turned 22, and I'm viewing him as a risky but basically big league ready shortstop prospect who's got 20-30 upside next year. Probably won't get to that, but tough guy to rank because I'm definitely got some concerns about the long-term durability with Jordan Lawlar. Big Doink says, if you had to pick a couple guys who haven't debuted yet but you think have a good shot at making the 2025 opening day roster for their teams, who would you choose? Okay, I got 3 prospects for you that I think have a good shot at making their 2025 opening day rosters. Bubba Chandler of the Pirates, who I just mentioned. Dalton Rushing of the Dodgers. I think he should make the team next year. He'll be on all the top 100 lists. He's, Will Smith's been quite bad over the past month or two. And I don't think they'd mind seeing what Rushing can do, at least on sort of a part-time basis there. And then, they've tried Rushing a little bit in left field. They could make some pieces fit, I think, with Rushing in LA. And he's just been awesome this year. He's always been a prospect of note, but this is definitely his best year by far in the upper levels, no less. And then the third prospect I'll mention that I think has a good shot to make the opening day roster next year is Edgar Caro with the White Sox. I think he could be their opening day starter at catcher. Caro probably would have come up this year if he hadn't gotten injured. And then I'll throw in like Kumar Rocker as just a wild card where like I think Kumar Rocker is going to be ready to be in the big league rotation at the start of the season next year, but I just think with the workload aspect of things and how they're going to have to manage that, it's probably more likely that they kind of slow play him out of the gates. M Fest says Jett Williams of the Mets, despite missing basically the entire year due to injury, is this your highest rank yet? No loss of confidence or having him bypassed by others who've performed well this year? What is peak projection and what position? Williams, his peak ranking was 14th overall in October of last year. So this is not quite his highest rank yet. But you had a bunch of graduations and you had a bad draft class. So I don't have any guys from the draft class ahead of him, and a bunch of guys graduated who otherwise would have been ahead of him. So hence he is still in the top 20. And I can sense that I'm probably out on a bit of an island with how high I've got Williams ranked, but he can play shortstop. I doubt he'd take over from Francisco Lindor anytime soon, but he could be a plus defender at second base. He could play center field. I've always viewed Williams as kind of like his ceiling being sort of just Corbin Carroll light. Good batting average, really good OBP. Should get to 40 steals some years, and then I think Williams will eventually develop 20 homer power. I don't think he's there yet, but so yeah, I mean 20-40 upside with a really, really high OBP and a pretty high batting average is what I view Jett Williams' ceiling as. Beerbot says big jump for Yilber Diaz to the Diamondbacks. He's just coming off the IL. Can you touch on why he made the jump? Well, he was on the IL for less than 2 weeks, so I mean it wasn't like he was down for that long. And he struck out 13 in 2 of his last 6 starts at AAA. In his last 5 starts at AAA, which is August plus September, he's got a 3.42 ERA, a 1.29 WHIP. And that's in the Pacific Coast League, and 2 of those starts were in Albuquerque, and 1 was in Reno. So I'm very impressed. I think Yilber Diaz is just a very exciting, potentially cheap option in 2025, especially in draft and hold leagues. And he's got a very high upside, kind of like what I was talking about earlier with just guys like Rocker, guys like Mizorowski. Guys with that type of strikeout upside are tough to find. He's definitely struggled with his control at times, and I do think the floor is pretty low with Diaz. But this has been a very impressive campaign for him. I thought he was a reliever coming into the year, and now I believe he's a high strikeout starter. So great 2024 season for Yilber Diaz. Gonna lump. I got a question about Xavier Isaac and I got a few questions about Lazaro Montes. I'm going to lump these together because I think they kind of come to the same point. But O's Flow says, what's going on with Xavier Isaac's K rate? And then David Addison says, I'm wondering why Lazaro Montes of the Mariners continues to drop with the arrow down. Hasn't he been crushing it lately? Yeah, this Xavier Isaac and Lazaro Montes, I think, kind of illustrate just how big that 4th tier of prospects is. I think Junior Camaro's in a tier of his own at the top, and then I think it's Walcott, Dominguez, Anthony, Jenkins, DeVries from 2 to 6. I think there's another small tier from 7 to 11 with Mayo, Cruz, Campbell, Shaw, and Clark. And then there's just this big ass tier, and I regret where Lazaro Montes is ranked. And honestly, David was the one whose question I included, but I got other questions. Eric Segrist chimed in about Montes. I honestly hadn't noticed Montes's last 2 weeks, where he's kind of fixed the K issue. If we even want to look at 2 weeks as a big enough sample to say something's fixed, but there's always been more questions, I think, in the scouting community about Montes's hit tool than Isaac's hit tool. Both power over hit, but I think there have definitely been more skeptics about Montes translating against big league pitching, and I think Isaac is still the safer bet. It's concerning to see that K rate where it is at AA. Hopefully just kind of a small sample where if the season went another couple months, we would see him adjust and find his footing. So I just want to say I wanted to loop Isaac and Montes together because they are 28 spots apart on the rankings, but you should value them just pretty simply. So it's very frustrating. Like I wish that tier wasn't as big. I wish that I could kind of turn off the down arrows for that big tier, but is what it is. Don't trade Lazaro Montes or cut Lazaro Montes just because you see the down arrow there. And Parker says, how does Luis Merejo of the Guardians stack up from a scouting perspective? Yeah, so Merejo opened the year in complex ball. He's raked even more after promotion to single A. still 18. I think he's a young 18 too. He's got a good bat path. He's logged ground ball rates below 38% at every stop. Doesn't really mess around with using the whole field yet. He's looking to aggressively hammer pitches to the pull side and hitters counts. I doubt the speed with Merejo is going to be a thing when he's 22 or 23. He's got 11 steals this year. I think that's probably more just a product of him being on base a lot and being up against batteries that don't really know how to control the running game. But, he's righty, but other than that, it's kind of a classic first base profile. I could see the strikeouts creeping up at high A or double A, but definitely no concerns about Merejo's power. So I think it'll be kind of, let's see where he's at when he gets the promotion to high A, double A. He could be a pretty big riser pretty early next season if he's able to kind of hit the ground running after a promotion. Chaz Beef says, what is sending Luis Pena of the Brewers and Jesus Mate of the Brewers in such opposite directions? I've seen people who have a similar opinion of them to you and others who actually prefer Pena slightly. It's just the power projection, current power. That's kind of the big difference. Pena had a high slugging percentage in the DSL, but he only had one homer, and he's very fast. He's very athletic. He's the type of guy who's going to rack up doubles and triples in the in the DSL because of his speed and his bat to ball ability, his strikeout rate under 10%. So it's just, he hit one home run in 44 games, and that lined up with pre-DSL scouting reports on Pena. And it's just such a power-friendly circuit that it's notable when a player doesn't hit for over-the-fence power there. Mate, on the other hand, checks every single box that you could look for. Like if you're creating a DSL prospect in a lab, just from a stats and physical standpoint, like Pena's or Mate's, what you would kind of draw up. He's got the same speed and athleticism as Pena and same type of stolen base upside, but he's also got just ridiculous bat speed, very projectable frame for power. He did hit 6 homers in 51 games. He walked way more than he struck out. So Mate is kind of like the perfect DSL prospect. And then Pena, it's just kind of everything except the powers there. And there's a lot of guys like Pena in the DSL this year, like where it's just everything's very impressive except not a ton of power. So Mate is kind of a more harder to find type of prospect. Okay. PTGD-Assman says, who is on your short list of players not currently in the top 50 who you believe have the best chance of being ranked in the top 10 at this time next year? And then who are some ranked outside the top 100 you feel have a shot at top 10? Well, okay. Outside the top 50, I think Braden Montgomery of the Red Sox, Connor Griffin of the Pirates, Felton Celestine of the Mariners, Arjun Nimmala of the Blue Jays, Theo Gillen of the Rays, Bryce Rainier of the Tigers, Cam Collier of the Reds. Cam Collier looking like he might be, like a just massive slugging third baseman type that we just love in fantasy. Ethan Salas of the Padres turning it on. Johnny Farmello of the Mariners. Those guys are all in the 51 to 100 range, and I think they all have a shot of being top 10 this time next year. And then outside the top 100, Jason Churio of the Guardians, Slade Caldwell of the Diamondbacks, George Lombard of the Yankees, Ty Pete of the Mariners, Luis Merejo of the Guardians, Kellen Lindsay of the Dodgers, Sammy Stafura of the Reds, Brandon Winokur of the Twins, and Braylor Guerrero of the Rays are some guys that at least have a small chance of being top 10 in a year. But I would not expect that out of any of those guys. And then JJ says, I have Junior Caminero, Walker Jenkins, Dylan Cruz on a 6-player rookie roster. I will drop Spencer Jones of the Yankees and Ethan Holiday, obviously an amateur, for Sebastian Walcott and Leo Dallas DeVries. And based on projected ceiling, he wants to know, should I also drop Charlie Condon for Matt Shaw of the Cubs. Well, you've got quite the league you're in, where you're able to have 6 rookies on your roster, and you were just able to pick up Walcott and DeVries to go with Caminero, Jenkins, and Cruz. So you've got 5 of the top 8 prospects. I'm doing my math right there. So based on projected ceilings, should you drop Charlie Condon for Matt Shaw? Yes. I think holding Condon over Shaw just for the sake of upside just kind of misses the mark to me. Condon's 99th percentile outcome is higher than Shaw's, but Shaw is very likely to be at least a top 150 player in fantasy, and he's got a high ceiling. Like Shaw, there's no reason Shaw couldn't be a 25-25 guy. He's absolutely got the tools to go 25-25. He's a good hitter. He might have a plus hit tool and go 25-25. So there's no lack of ceiling there with Shaw, and his floor is just so high. Condon, it's possible Condon's never even a top 200 player in fantasy. So, I think unless this is just like a league where you're the only person who ever makes moves on prospects, like it, which kind of sounds like it is, I don't see any reason to hold Condon over Shaw. And Cody Martin says no George Wolkow of the White Sox. Why? This was a really tough update in terms of cuts. Like I cut about 50 guys. Like I was working on my rankings and I got to about like 450 guys, and I had to start just cutting guys. So Wolkow was one of those cuts. I think his contact rate of just over 50% was a good enough reason to cut him. I would not roster Wolkow over the guys that I ranked, but if you want to just chase that crazy power upside and bet on him developing his hit tool, I think that's perfectly fine. Just not for me. But to each their own. Okay. Thanks again to everyone for the awesome questions. And I will try to include that thing I kind of teased at the beginning. I will try to include the under the radar prospects to target in very early draft and holds for 2025. I think I'll include that in the article version of this. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And the ETAs were all updated this morning on the top 400, and the team top 20s. Haven't gotten to those yet, but I'll get to those probably tomorrow. I would hope that those will be done by Friday, but we'll see. Thanks again to everyone for the questions. The podcast is brought to you by Pick Six, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPicks for $50 in Pick Six credits with a $5 deposit.